All right, everyone, we're going to look now at how your hours are accounted for when you are paid by the hour. So, for example, it's quite simple. If you work a job and let's say you work to complete 8 hours, well, you worked 8 hours. But quite often, you'll work parts of an hour and you might start at, let's say, 8:30 in the morning and leave at 2:15 in the afternoon. And quite often, it's important to find out, well, how many minutes did you work? Now, when I say minutes, that's kind of incorrect as well. Most employers round to the nearest 15 minutes or quarter of an hour. So, for example, let's say you worked for, this is just kind of to the side here, let's say you worked for 2 hours and 3 minutes. In most cases, no, I'm not saying all the time, but in most cases, that will be rounded to 2 hours. If, on the other hand, you worked 2 hours and let's say 9 minutes, that would be rounded to 2 hours. Whoa, 2 hours. Let me just erase that there. Let's try that again. To 2 hours and 15 minutes. Now, you're going to notice that I somewhat disagree with how this lesson is presented to you. This lesson, if you really read it, it tries to make you go between the standard 12-hour clock and the 24-hour clock. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I mean, at grade 10, I don't think we need to go back and do a complete time and clock lesson, but if you're using a 12-hour format, let's say it's 10 in the morning, then it's 11 in the morning, 12 in the morning, and then it goes to 1 in the afternoon. You see how it goes always from 1 to 12. The 24-hour clock, of course, goes from 0 to 24. So it'd be 10 in the morning or 1000 hours. 11 in the morning is 1100. 12 o'clock is 1200 hours. And then 1 o'clock is 1300 hours. And, that is something you can look up on your own time. I don't really want to get into how to work all this right now, but I'm going to hold you kind of to a higher standard. I don't think we need to do all these conversions that they have in this lesson. So I'm going to kind of use mental math, and I'm going to hope that you can do the same. First of all, just so you know, like I said, for this course, we are going to round everything to the nearest quarter hour. And by quarter hour, I mean 15 minutes. Because if you look at a standard clock, you start at 0 minutes. This is 15 minutes. This is 30 minutes. This is 45 minutes, and then, of course, back around to 60 minutes. This is 1/4 of an hour. This is 2/4 of an hour, or half an hour, which is 30 minutes. This is 3/4 of an hour, 45 minutes, and then back up to 4/4 of an hour, or 1 full hour. Now, essentially, these questions have to come down to your ability to subtract, but you have to kind of use mental math. I'm just going to jump right here now to example 1. Mike worked from 8:30 to 11:30. How many hours did he work? Now you'll see here already they're going into the math. Well, I like to think that at a grade 10 level, you in your mind can go, well, okay, how many hours is it from 8:30 to 11:30? That's a 3-hour span. I know their math works, but I think that's pretty straightforward. It's a 3-hour work period. If you go to example 2, it says you go from 8:15 to 11:30. Now, again, if you want to ignore me, you can look at their subtraction there and you can do that. But for me, I think to myself, okay, well, how do I do this? If I'm at 8:15 and I go to 9:15, that's 1 hour. 10:15 is 2 hours. 11:15 is 3 hours. So how much more do I have? So again, if I'm at 8:15 and I go to 9:15, that's 1 hour. Now I'm at 10:15. That's 2 hours. So 1 hour. Now there's another hour. And if I go to 11:15, I'm not quite there yet. That's my 3rd hour. Now, how many more minutes do I have to add to get to 11:30? That's another 1/4 of an hour, or 15 minutes. So for me, that's 3 hours and 15 minutes. Now, obviously, you're thinking that your mind might work differently than mine, but I think my point that I'm trying to make to you is, let's not make this too much of a big deal. Again, if you look now here at example 3, this time Mike works from 8:30 to 11:15. Well, heck, if you read their answer here, they're going into the they're rounding, doing different grouping, and I don't want to do that. I like to think that, your brain, you can figure this out on your own. So if you go from 8:30, okay, well, if we add 1 complete hour, now we're at 9:30. If we add another complete hour, now we're at 10:30. And how many minutes do we have to add to get to 11:15? Well, it's simply 45 more minutes. And that would give you to 11:15. Now, the different ways of recording that, you could say that's 2 hours and 45 minutes. You also could say, remember, you also could say 2 hours and 3/4. There's different ways of doing this, but again, I don't want to go too much. I think for your purposes, I would stick with the hours and minutes, okay? There might be another one here for us to try. It says here, this person goes from 11:15 to 3:30. Now, here you go. This is an example where they're changing into the 24-hour clock, which, quite honestly, you can. If you want to read this and go through it, I would never admit that my way works for everyone. But again, I kind of like to think to myself that you can do this without these big changes. To be quite honest, I think most of you can do this straight in your head. Even if you write it down, let's go this way. 11:15. If you add 1 hour, you're at 12:15. Add another hour, you're at 1:15. Let's see, then we're at 2:15. Then we add another hour, we're at 3:15. We're almost there. So that was 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Now we're not quite there yet, but how many more minutes do we have to add? It should simply be 15 more minutes. And that would get us to 3:30. So in my mind, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 hours and 15 minutes. And again, you can see how important this is in the real world. You're going to want to know, you're going to hopefully keep track of how many hours and quarter hours you've worked. And you always want to be able at the end of the month or end of the 2 weeks or end of 1 week, you want to compare your timekeeping to your employer's. I can tell you many times where I had a number, let's say I had a number of 4 hours and 15 minutes, and my employer had 3 hours and 30 minutes. And that then leads to a conversation where you just have to get to the bottom of it. But I think to be responsible, it is your job to be able to account for the time that you've worked, just in case something goes wrong and there's a mistake made on either side. Again, I really believe that mental math can be used here. If you and your teacher want to go into the 24-hour clock or a different way of doing this, that is totally okay. Again, I'm not going to move on to example 5. I like to think that you can do this now. But just please remember, we want to be able to account for exactly how minutes we have worked for. And for this unit, or this course, we are going to go to the nearest 15 minutes. I'll now give you a chance to do some practice.